Hi, we just returned from a birding trip to Belize where we were lucky enough to capture about 175 different species of birds. About 50 of them were new to us, and so it was a successful birding trip. I use this OM1 that I've had since its release date. This is a version 1. I have the 300 F4 that I've had years before that. I have a 1.4 teleconverter that I may or may not use depending on the conditions. Now, the reason I decided to do this video is I've seen images online and people are able to shoot at a fast shutter speed and keep their ISOs low, and I look at them and I often think, boy, they must be shooting out in the open and have really good light. I'm going to say at least 50% of the time in Belize we were shooting in dense forest, sometimes in the rain, and it was really poor lighting conditions. And those are much more challenging to take pictures than in bright light. And so after just doing this is the best time I feel to share my experiences with my camera, how I set it up to be able to take pictures in all kinds of conditions. And that's what I'm going to share with you today. I'm going to show images in Lightroom, talk about how the settings that were used, and I hope that this will help you if you get in these same kind of conditions, because it isn't always shooting in wide open bright light. It's very often shooting in very poor conditions, and that's what this video is about. I'm going to start this video by talking how I have my camera set up. I'm going to start on the top of my camera, and if you look here, this is a shutter release button. By default, half press will initiate autofocus. I've turned off that function. This only releases the shutter. This is the autofocus on button, back button focus, whatever you want to call it. So I will press this button to initiate autofocus. I can hold it on, and then I can just shoot a burst by pressing this periodically. I just find that easier than trying to press, half press, half press. That's why I have gone to back button autofocus. Next one I've changed is, this is by default exposure compensation. This is something I use a lot, and I have switched it to this. This is ISO by default. This is now my exposure compensation. My thumb just works freely across here. I just find it more comfortable. I just hold down that button and turn the front dial, and I can adjust exposure compensation. Something that I adjust a lot, so I need it convenient. This is now my ISO, which I don't use very often. These are my custom buttons. Lots of people don't use them. It's a shame. They're really useful. C4 is for pre-capture, pro-capture. Not going to talk about it. That's a video in itself. C3 is a non-bird setting. C2 is for my flying birds. C1 is for my perched birds. And manual I also use when I go out to the field. This is for perched birds, but it has different settings, and I'll show you that in a second. Okay, on the back of my camera, this is a joystick. I use all points active most of the time, so I rarely use this joystick. You can change how many points are active by pressing that and turning your front dial. But what I have done is most of the time I use all points active or a single point, and I'll come back to that a little bit. And that lever does this. I've set this lever. So in position 1, this is all points active. Position 2 is single point. This autofocus lock, I have changed this to subject detection. I press that. If you press it and hold it, you can change subjects. It's almost always bird detection for me. I just press it on, press it off. Most of the time bird detection is on, but occasionally it doesn't work and you have to shut it off. Okay, so get into my settings. So this is the C2. I said this is my flying birds settings. I'm going to start with some things down here. I shoot RAW. Goes to card 1, JPEG goes to card 2. I only download RAW. I edit off RAW. Some people say they don't like editing. To me, this is just part of the photographic process. RAW gives you much more flexibility, so I only work off RAW. This is just a backup in case that card fails. Never has, fortunately, but just in case. I will talk just quickly about image stabilization. Some people say, oh, change it for panning, turn it off for this or that. It is an auto for me all of the time. I can even put my camera on a tripod. I've always found Olympus image stabilization to be really smart, and you'll get sharp images no matter what you do with. I just leave it in auto. I use SH2 at 25 frames per second almost all the time for birds. Gives me lots of choices of selection. I'll show you in a second. Just be aware when you use SH2, auto ISO, doesn't matter what ISO, you cannot go above 12,800 on an OM1. I believe the OM1 Mark II goes up to 25,000. But they have put a restriction on it on ISO, so that's as high as I can go, and I'm okay with that because that's pretty much as fast or as high ISO as I feel comfortable with my Micro Four Thirds. I'm always in continuous autofocus, even when I'm shooting scenery in aperture mode. I hold down that button, I get my focus, I just release the button, and so I just find it works fine. I don't need to change it. These two, if you're shooting raw, don't matter. I talked about all points active when you're doing birds, flying birds. You pretty much need all points active most of the time. Occasionally I'll go to a smaller grouping, but trying to track a bird with single point would be a pretty frustrating process. I use exposure compensation when I switch to C2. These are the settings come up. It will be a plus 0.7, and I'll explain why. It's maximum aperture. This is my 300 f4. If I put my 40-150 2.8, it will go to 2.8. If I put my teleconverter on, it'll be 5.6. So whatever is available, it will be maximum aperture. And again, 1/2500th of a second. This is my C1. This is perch birds. Again, it's SH2, auto ISO. Again, maximum aperture, no exposure compensation, but I start at 1/500th of a second for perch birds, but realize there is a restriction. I can only go to 1/320th when I'm shooting high-speed sequential SH2. Sometimes I need to go slower. That's when I switch out of C1 into manual, but in this, I start at 1/500th for perch birds, and I can go down to 1/320th. Now, this is where lots of people will disagree with me, but I have all points active, even on perch birds. If the camera can see the bird, it will quickly grab it. Remember what I said, if the camera, it doesn't matter if you can see a little bit of the bird, the camera has to clearly see the bird. Now, if it can't see the bird clearly, I will switch to single point, and then I will put that single point on the bird's head. And if it still can't focus, that does happen sometimes, I will switch off the bird detection, and then usually that single point, so that lever, it's either all or single point, and the single point will get me my autofocus. The next setting is manual. I said sometimes I go to manual. Now here, it says I've gone to a slower sequential or single shot, whatever you decide to do, but no high-speed burst. It should be continuous autofocus. I just accidentally pulled the clutch down when I took this image. I've been using lots of active points again, but I am in manual. What is really different here is now I can choose whatever shutter speed I want. I can go as low as I want to go. 1/100th is the default I have here in manual. I rarely go below that because, and I'll show you why in a second. Again, I can go above that restriction of 12,800, not an SH2. I usually use auto ISO, and then my auto ISO is maxed at 12,800. And again, maximum aperture. Okay, so again, this video is about shooting in low light, tough conditions. And so really you have a couple options, and one is to increase the ISO. And realize that when you do this, it increases the sensitivity of your sensor. It does not get more light on your sensor. And your sensor really likes to have lots of light to make a good image. So by increasing the sensitivity, you're going to increase the grain of the noise of your image. If you go too high, you're going to reduce detail of your image, and if you go crazy high, you're going to get color shifts. So there's a downside to increasing that sensitivity. So my preference is always to lower the shutter speed. The problem with this is, and this does let in more light, and you know if you shoot at night, you can actually put your camera on a tripod and leave the shutter open as long as you want at base ISO, and you will get enough light to make a good image. The problem with this for birds is motion blur. So if you use too low a shutter speed, you're going to get motion blur, and I'll show you what I mean by that in just a second. Okay, now let's look at some images. And so this white collared mannequin is the first one we're going to look at. And this bird was shot in good light, 1/100th of a second. My ISO is only 320. No exposure compensation. So I'm obviously in manual with this. I have my teleconverter on, so obviously some good light. Just going to talk about subject detection for 1 second. So when the bird is clearly visible like this, there's a lot of distractions around this bird, but the autofocus system with all points active immediately grabbed this bird. Now, when I first took my first shot, this branch was actually covering part of his body, and it still managed to catch him with all points active because it could see him clearly, especially the eye and the head. Then I just repositioned myself because I don't want anything in front of the bird. Having said that, sometimes you will get a branch going across the front of the bird, and the camera is going to want to focus on that, and it will not focus on the bird. So that's where I will go to single point, and I will put it on the head up here. I will leave bird detection on because it will probably work, but sometimes it doesn't. And that's when I will just press that button, turn off subject detection, and I will take over control of the camera and put my focus point on the head and get my shot. Now, some people say it just doesn't work very well, and I'm going to suggest to you the biggest problem with people doing that is they're trying to take a picture of a small bird across a football field, and sorry, but that's just never going to work very well. So you have to be close enough to the bird so that the camera can see the bird clearly. Okay, so get back. This is good light, 1/100th of a second. My second image is the same bird, and all he did was sing. And you can see the motion blur. So even at 1/100th. So this is a case where, well, I could have gone to C1 and I could have been 1/500th. Might have frozen the action here, but I don't really want to look down the throat of a bird anyway. Much prefer that little head turn like that. So this is a better picture anyway. So 1/100th of a second, I can take a picture of this bird. Okay, so this is a black colored hawk, and he just took off from these branches. And so in this case, I'm in C2. So this is, when you get into flying birds, this is where you need more light, of course. But in this case, I'm not using my teleconverter. I'm at F4, 1/2500th of a second. My ISO is only 1600. And so no problem shooting here. There's lots of light. So I'm showing some images with lots of light. Exposure compensation. So again, by default, remember it would be plus 0.7. I actually turned it down because it's fairly dark around the bird. And if I leave it at 0.7, I'm probably going to blow out some of the white around his head. So in this case, I'm using auto ISO, and I turned down the exposure compensation, and I was able to catch a nice image of this bird. This one's too far away to be a great picture, but it lets me show you what I wanted to show. In this case, everything is the same lighting conditions, so lots of light there, but I actually turned the exposure compensation up to 1. This is a black bird flying against a bright sky. If you did not up the exposure compensation, he would be just pure black with no detail. Yeah, you can try and pull the details in post, but it never is as good as exposing correctly in the first place. That's why you need to be on that exposure compensation if you're using auto ISO. Now this is where it gets more interesting. So it was actually drizzling, cloudy day, drizzling, and we were trying to shoot hummingbirds. And these are fast, erratic birds. They're about as tough as it gets to try and photograph. And so I'm using 1/2500th. I'm going to suggest to you that that's probably minimum shutter speed for a hummingbird like this. And in fact, most people would say faster. My technique is they were coming to feeders, so I watch, and as they approach the feeder, they slow down and their wing beat is at its slowest. And that's when I can get away with 1/2500th of a second. But on this particular day, you can see that my ISO went up to 8000, and I am using exposure compensation. This is default. This bird is dark. The background is light. If I did not use some exposure compensation, he would be black. Again, you could try and pull up in post, but it's much better to expose correctly in the first place. So next bird, same location. This one is almost filling the screen, my viewfinder. That's a challenge when you're shooting these fast little birds. In this case, again, no teleconverter on. And that's the first thing I'm going to say there is that I'm at F4. And this is at 12,800, 1/2500th of a second. You cannot go any slower, because if you look, I will zoom in on the body. The body is nice and sharp. You can see lots of detail, but the wings have motion in them. I'm okay with that because he's in motion. But even the tail has a little bit of motion in there. So you cannot go less than 2/2500th of a second, and your ISO is going to be at its limit. If you were using a 6.3 lens, you would need an ISO of 30,000, and you couldn't use SH2, and it would be a challenge to shoot this bird. Want to just point out, when I'm shooting, I'm taking bursts, and I probably took 50 shots of this bird, and I have one with his tail flared out like this. So people say anticipate. You will never anticipate when he's going to flare his tail. So I recommend you just, you use your burst mode, fast burst mode, and you take lots of images, and you hopefully get the one that you want. And something like this, they're moving so fast, you don't even really see this until you start to look at it on a computer afterwards. Okay, so now we're getting, those were still in okay light. So we're getting into lower and lower light situations. Now this guy, roughest tail Jacobin, he's a really pretty little bird, about the size of a robin, I would say. So anyway, he lives deep. He was deep in the forest, really deep shade and shadows where we were. And I'm in C1 with this one. Default, of course, is 1/500th of a second, and my ISO was all the way up at 12,800. Now, just point out, I did have my teleconverter on, small birds at a distance, so I'm using my teleconverter, so that pushed my ISO very high. I could drop this to 3/20th of a second, but instead I chose to switch to manual and went to 1/100th of a second, and I am now down to ISO 5000. So this picture and this picture, I chose two that were unedited to be able to show you the difference here. And so we talked about, okay, you can crank up the ISO. You can see the grain that we have in here. I have some detail on the bird. I could recover this picture. So I could use that high ISO. But I go to this next picture, and again, this is unedited. And when I start to zoom in on him, there's still grain because I'm at ISO 5000. But you can see how much more feather detail I have. And when I clean this guy up, this is what you're going to end up with. And I think quite a good image. And so if I zoom in here, you can see the detail that I've been able to capture with this bird. So ISO 5000 is not a challenge for the OM1 at all. But if I can drop my shutter speed and still get a sharp image, that is going to be my choice all of the time. However, I talked about moderate light. I would call those last ones moderate light. This is the terrible light. This is a great curassaw, and we got this in Tikal, and these birds are really tough to get. They've been hunted and their habitats have been destroyed, and they're really only found in reserves like around Tikal. And so we knew they were there. We told our guide that we wanted to get them. He said he knew where they hang out, and we had to go early in the morning, and guess what? He was right. They were there. But you can see that I have no teleconverter on. I am in C1, I have dropped to 1/320th of a second, and my ISO is still 12,800. I did drop down I switched to manual and went to 1/100th of a second. All I had was blurry mess. Because if you look at the foot of this bird, the foot of this bird, and the foot of this bird, these birds are in constant motion. They just don't stand still. And even this one at 320th of a second, it's got motion blur. So what I do to handle a situation like this is I go back to SH2, I shoot at 25 frames a second, and I probably took 100 images of this bird. And you say that's a little excessive. Probably a good 25% of those, even at 1/320th of a second, are not sharp. So it's important to take lots and lots of images. And so this has got motion blur. This one is sharp. He slowed down enough that I got a sharp image of him. But if you look at him, he's walking through the scene. He almost looks like he's walking away from us. And when I took this one, so I'm shooting in burst, and you get the little head turn, and so much more engaging of a photo. So get the little head turn, and again, it is sharp. So take lots of images, shoot in burst, and that's my recommendation. Just going to show this one. This is the female, and you can see that I'm, again, 1/320th of a second, ISO 12,800, no teleconverter, so very poor lighting conditions. But I could clean it up. I've gotten rid of pretty much most of the noise. I've been able to sharpen it up and bring the detail back in. If you look at the feathers, they're probably lacking some of the fine detail that you'll get at lower ISOs. But considering the conditions, I'm pretty happy with these pictures. So again, when the light gets bad, you have to adapt and do what you need to do to get your images. Okay, the next images I'm going to show, what I'm trying to show is the effect of distance. So I'm going to be comparing these two pictures, and I know he popped his head out and they're not exactly the same, so pay attention to the leaves and the grain and the things that are in here, but they are exactly the same settings, exactly the same settings. So what is the difference between this image and this image? The difference is we were on a boat, and so he saw the boat build heron, he turned off the motor and let the boat drift in towards the heron. And this image is about half the distance, less than half the distance that the previous image. So the other one was a lot further. So when I cropped to get the same amount of the head, basically you're zooming in on the image is what you're doing. And when you do that, you increase the size of the grain. So we're at ISO 4000. That's not an extremely high ISO, but we're increasing the size of the grain when we zoom in. So I fixed both the images, and this is the one, previous one. So he's twice as far away. Yeah, he's different head position and all that, but if you look at the branches and stuff around, and you see how much detail we're capturing, and so we're capturing some detail, it cleans up kind of okay. But if you look at this one, and you see now, that's so much better an image, and all the leaves, and you see how sharp they are and how I could clean it up. So ISO 4000, no problem to clean it up, and so I wasn't worried about that whatsoever. But this really demonstrates the effect of distance, and this is true even in good light. People take pictures across the length of a football field, and they wonder why their images aren't sharp, and they're never going to be. And in low light, this becomes even more important when you're pushing your ISO. It's important that you get as close as you can. No, you can't always get close to the bird, but get as close as you can. Take your first picture. That's what we did here. Took a picture in case he woke up and flew away, but he wasn't going to fly away. He was just sitting there, and we were able to capture a much better image. I just want to finish up with a few recommendations here. And first one is just take lots of images. It doesn't cost anything, and you can always delete the ones that you don't want. People will say there's too many images to go through. I have adjusted my reviewing technique so that I can go through images pretty quickly, and you can too. Second one I want to suggest is make sure you get your image. Now, I talked about the Jacobin where, okay, I dropped it down to 1/100th of a second, but you saw I first took an image at a faster shutter speed. So do what you need to do to make sure you get your image first and foremost. So I can't fix blurry, but I can remove noise. So I will always take an image with a faster shutter speed, and then I will adjust as it says below. Same with distance. Okay, you saw we took a picture when we first saw the boat-billed heron. You never know, he might just decide to fly away and you might not get your second image. So make sure you get your image, even if it's from a distance. And yes, there will be more noise when you blow it up. But then you adjust and you get closer, and you try and get closer and closer and as close as you can. And I won't say until a bird flies away. I will say until you can see that the bird's feeling pressure. I will never try and force a bird to fly away just so I can take a picture. But make sure you get your image, then you adjust. And some of the recommendations I've made for adjusting, I think, can help you with that. As for my camera settings, I'm going to say that those are what worked for me. I'm not going to say that they're the best. I would suggest that you watch more than one video and see what people recommend, and then you choose what you think works best for you. I know this works for me. I've been using it for a long time, so choose what works best for you.